When I left the World Bank, everybody said, Madelyn, you are crazy. You're leaving this incredible institution where you're making gobs of money. Why do you want to be on your own? And I said, because when I do something, I want to do it right for the people that I'm working with. I want to help them be who they are. I want to help them to be their best because I want to be the best. And I can't do that if an institution cuts me too short, binds me in terms of how I need to operate. So for me, to be in business means I can do things the way I feel they should be done in a human world. To me, there's two aspects to one's preparation for a job. One is called the formal background. You know, where did you go to school? What did you study? And I'll go through that. The second, though, which I think is equally important, are some of the experiences that you've had. So let me do the formal stuff first. I went to Rutgers University and studied mathematics. I took every course they had because I absolutely loved it. It was just a marvelous training for my mind to think logically and systematically about any kind of situation. The second degree that I got was an MBA, a Master's in Business Administration at the University of Pennsylvania at the Wharton School. Now the Wharton School is known as being the finance business school, and so I chose there to study finance. I took some accounting too, mainly because I didn't know anything about finance and accounting. And I figured if that's their best, I'll take their best. I wish now I had studied organizational development because I really love working in that arena. But both the accounting and the finance has helped me in running my business, in understanding how business is run. It even helps me prepare my retirement portfolio. My third degree is a PhD. Formally, that degree is called a PhD in sociology. But my specialty was organizational psychology. And that had to do with how groups of people work together and how they interact. That degree is from the University of Tilburg in Holland. That particular institution, like the Wharton School, is highly respected in the European community. We hardly hear of it here in the United States, but I learned after I started studying with them that indeed I was at one of the best universities in the world in this particular area of sociology. So those are the three formal things that I have acquired. I also always assure that every year I go and I take some workshop in some relevant area, or maybe sometimes just because I want to expand my understanding of things. So if, I won't go through that long list because it's been a lot of years that I've been doing this, but I would say there's been at least 30 special projects or special programs that I've signed up for and attended with real seriousness. For example, I just spent 2 years with a man by the name of Bo Eason studying how to better present myself from the stage, because I really like to do speaking. And it was one of the best experiences that I've ever had, watching how, not only what he was teaching, but how he taught. So that's the formal side. Some people refer then to the informal side. I don't think it's informal. I think real life is quite real and not necessarily informal. I call it the experiential side. And I began my career working in a research laboratory where I worked with a small group of people doing research tasks. I was a low man on the totem pole, and I learned how to do that kind of work, which was statistical work, amongst people similar to myself, and always aspiring to move up. But hey, you have to do the groundwork first. My next job was at the University of Maine. There, I was a programmer, and I rather enjoyed programming. I think because when you do that, you see results very quickly. It's either right or wrong, because the computer either understands what you tell it or not. Very quickly, though, I would say within less than 2 years, I was promoted to a position called the Director of Institutional Research for the entire state of Maine, for the university system. And that was mind-blowing for me, because at a very early age, I was only 28 at the time, I suddenly had to manage a group of people and work in research of a rather large nature with a lot of impact. It wasn't just that I wasn't protected by other people around me. What I said about, student enrollment for the coming 5 years, that's really what the university planned on. So I learned how to really think and accept the fact that what I did had real impact. It was a great, great lesson for me, along with the management issue. I was recruited from there to the University of Colorado, where I did the same job. And again, having enormous impact in terms of the research that I did, in terms of impacting how the institution would make its decisions. I'll never forget one time they asked me to look at the utilization of classrooms, because they discovered that the utilization of classrooms all around the quad, that's the center part of the campus, they were used all the time. But then they had these outbuildings and the utilization dropped off. And so we had to explore, why does that happen? And is it something you can do something about? Or is that the norm? So that was the University of Colorado. I took some time off to go to graduate school, getting my MBA, and I went on to IBM. Now IBM was a great experience. Again, it was a combination of formal training, because I was in what's called large systems, and I was a large systems marketing representative. I don't think IBM has that anymore, but because that role was key to the company, absolutely central to its success, candidates there were taught in formal classes all through their first year. So you learned how to do your job. And that was a marvelous experience, because here you're not just learning concepts and theory, but you're learning how to apply it to the business situation. You also learn how to deal within a large organization. That's very different to deal within, IBM at that time was 400,000 across the world. It's very different to work in that kind of a setting than it is to work, say, in a university setting. I foolishly left IBM and joined a small college, and don't ask me why I did it. You always have to make a mistake in your life somewhere along the line. I did, and it didn't take long before that mistake was clear to everyone. I had completely forgotten that in a small organization, you've got to watch every one of your relationships with people. It wasn't like IBM, where you could, in a sense, hide. You had plenty of other people. So if you messed up over here, you could make it up over here. Can't do that in a small organization. I was fired. In the end, the best thing that ever happened to me, although I did not think that at the time. From there, I went to the World Bank, where I worked in that area between the end users of computing department and the computing department. So I had to speak technical language, and I had to speak end user language. But I had that all in me, because I had learned that at IBM and many other things. I stayed there for 10 years, became a division chief there, and accomplished some amazing, amazing things. I created the first technical library that the bank had, and I don't mean a library of manuals. It was a library of current materials on the computing industry, and at that time, the PC had just entered the marketplace, and seriously. So people were really in need of understanding that. I created the first classroom that was automated, and that model of that classroom was used literally by the bank for close to 20 years before they improved on that technical model. We did a lot of other things, so it was a great place to do some innovative stuff. However, at one point I decided that that was time for me to move on and create my own company. And I've been with my own company and have enjoyed it enormously, because now I'm doing experiences that are very, very different each time. Every time I turn around, it's a different project, a different problem for a different client, and it keeps you thinking. My mother would always say, it keeps you young, Madelyn. So that gives you a sense of the formal education that I have, and some people would call informal, I call experiential background that essentially has prepared me for the amazing things that people ask me to do today. When I left the World Bank, that was almost 30 years ago. That's when I started my first business, and we're still in business, which I think is quite remarkable for a boutique consulting firm. Usually they burn out in about 2 years, rarely make it to 5 years, and we're pushing 30, well, 29 this year. You know, there are many ways to organize and manage a company. You can do it through venture capital, you can do it through self-financing, you can do it through partnership, you can do it through like a collaboration, a collaborative group. I chose to organize my company as a self-financed organization. I did not want to initially be burdened with having to deal with debt service. One of the reasons I was moving into business was to be free to have freedom. You can't do that as well if you have some debt service that you have to attend to. The other aspect that I consciously chose about how to run my business was that I chose to design the organization itself as a very small organization, never exceeding 5 people. And we have varied between 1 and 5 throughout those 29 years. At the moment, there are only 3 of us. And that was purposeful. I wanted to have a good, solid core that I could depend on, so that the administrative work was done, the technical work was done, and the substantive work was done. When I got projects that were larger than that, I relied upon relationships with colleagues literally around the world who wanted to work with me because they knew the kind of quality that I produced. And when I called them up to say, I've got a project, would you join me? They always said yes. So that was the way in which I have staffed the larger projects here and continue to do so. It has given me enormous flexibility. Not everyone can do that. But I chose that path, and it's worked extremely well for me. Getting the word out about what you do is always a challenge for any organization. When I started my company, I was very well known within the international arena. And when I say international arena, I mean organizations like the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, the various development banks, called regional development banks, the UN. Those international organizations knew of Madelyn Blair. And it made it easy for me to just let them know I'm now in business. I was employed with contracts from those various institutions almost continuously for, gosh, at least 15 years. Now, that's not good to have one source of business. So I would periodically reach out by speaking at conferences so people could see this person, hear what they had to say, hear the quality of the work that she did. Of course, you always depend on your clients to give you good word of mouth, and I was very fortunate that they were willing to share what they thought of what I did in a positive way, and were willing to share that. More recently, Even though I have worked in for-profit organizations, and I've worked in China, I've worked in Europe, I've worked in Brazil, lots of places, but in this day, you've really got to move into social media. And so I spent I think about the last 2 years really creating a presence in social media. So if you sign up for my Twitter account, or you link with me on LinkedIn or even Facebook, you will get almost daily a posting. Not something that necessarily that I write at the moment. Usually it's referencing other people's work, so that if you sign up for one of my pieces, or one of the channels, I guess would be the way to say it, you would be introduced to articles that relate to what I'm interested in. I'm interested in resilience, and there's a lot of people writing about it. There's no reason for me to think that I am the only person who can talk about it. And it represents to a community of people reading my stuff that this is a person who recognizes that there are many voices, and she brings those voices to the table, and we appreciate that. So it's a way to get known that way. All of my readerships, both Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, have been growing, I would say, very steadily. Not exponentially, but very steadily with that. I also publish a blog on my website as part of that social media presence. I don't do it as faithfully as I probably should, or consistently as I should. I tend to write when the muse inspires me, which is not the way you're supposed to do it, but it's in the end you have to deal with your time. And I'm also writing another blog for Psychology Today, and that's the one I really pay attention to, because they're hundreds of thousands, and not hundreds of thousands, sorry, thousands of people read my blogs there, or have read my blogs there. It's a great platform to get your message out. So there's 2 blogs. There's all the social media. I have also been now testing with radio, and discovered that when I'm on the air, people actually listen and call in. And that's been very exciting to me, because it's a way to, again, leverage a platform that I was unfamiliar with, and yet evidently am meeting some needs of a very large audience. I said to myself, I made a commitment that in 2017 I wanted to have a larger audience, because I want to speak on stage. And I've done that, but not as much as I'd like. And I was thinking, well, now in 2017 I can see several thousand people standing, in the audience listening to me. Well, what I didn't expect was that radio would give me an even larger audience than that. So those are some of the ways in which I have promoted my business to get it out there. Oh, of course, publishing my books. I mean, I've published 4 books, and that always helps to get the word out in terms of what you do. So, lots of things. I think technology has impacted everybody. I mean, I remember when it would take 3 days between the time you wrote a letter or a memo to someone and you would get a response. Now, when I say that to young people, they go, 3 days? I mean, to them, 3 minutes is a long time. But that was the technology at the time. That's what you did. Now, people think, well, then you couldn't do anything in the meantime. Well, of course you could do lots of things in the meantime, because you weren't just waiting for the response from that. You were doing whatever else you needed to do for your business or your work. You also could take some time to think. And that's the reflection I think is actually suffering today, because we allow the technology to impact us moment by moment. However, all that said, the fact that I can work with virtual people, and by virtual people I mean people at the other end of the internet, literally on the other side of the globe and work with them just as effectively as if they were next door to me or even in the same office. One man, his name is Sean Callahan, lives in Melbourne, Australia. Sean and I worked together for 4 years before we ever met. We did it using Skype, so we video conferenced and we wrote back and forth. We did some very interesting things together. And in fact, just recently he was in Washington and he called me and he said, Madelyn, I'm here, let's go to dinner, because we've become fast friends over that time. But it took us 4 years before we even met each other. So yes, the technology has some downsides and it has these wonderful sides, which is that now I literally can call upon people all over the world. In my book, I say to people that when you really want to improve how you understand something, find a practice partner. Now, what I mean by a practice partner is a person who is curious by nature, and so they ask questions. They may or may not be in your field. They may, instead of, I'm in sociology, I may want to talk to somebody who's in engineering. It didn't matter. What I want is someone who will ask questions. Now, the reason I say that is that when people ask me questions, I have to go into my mind and draw out answers. And sometimes I will say something in response to a question and I'll say, damn it, did anybody record that? I've never said that before. We have enormous knowledge in our minds. But because of the way we're designed, literally, we work best when against specific questions. And that practice partner works perfectly for that. Now, a lot of people look for mentors and people who give them advice. And I think everyone should have people who they can go to. I certainly have friends that I can go to, and I'll go to this person because I want some legal perspectives on something, and I'll go to another person because they really know marketing, and we'll have informal chats about that. But when I get down really serious, I go to the people that I call my practice partners. And they know it. I mean, I've told them, you're my practice partner. And oftentimes I'm their practice partner. It's not that we're giving each other advice. We're just asking questions. It's because much of the wisdom and knowledge is within us. One of the reasons I went into business was because I was at the World Bank and I saw a transformation there from a very highly ethical organization to one that said it was ethical but did not operate internally that way. I couldn't stay in that situation because in order to survive there, I would have had to move away from my ethical position. To me, we are put on this earth as members of a human society. And our job that we're called upon to do is to help each other. You know, when you look at a pride of lions or a pack of wolves or a herd of elephants, one of the reasons they stick together is because that helps them survive. Well, human beings won't survive if we don't treat each other as members of a family. And it's hard to conceive of, 7.5 billion people in your family, but in fact, we are all family. We're all related to one another. And if we don't take care of each other, we won't survive. That's the basis of my ethics. And I absolutely stick with it. Even at what some people would consider the detriment of my, you could say my business. What they really mean is you won't make as much money. Money to me is something that you use in order to live. And that's important, it's essential, but it's not the ultimate goal. Living with a set of ethics in your mind is not always straightforward. And ethics are really built on values and a real sense of purpose. And what it means is that every time that is tested, you are being tested. When I work with people and coach them, I have them spend some time thinking about what they think their purpose is. Because I say to them, if you know that purpose, it's probably the thing that draws you and energizes you. And if you divert yourself away, you lose that source of energy. It's almost like unplugging the electrical socket from the wall and saying, well, I'm going to walk over here and, oh, why is my fan not working? Or why is my something not working? Because you unplugged it. It's not simple to do. You have to really get in touch with values and then understand what those ethics are underneath. But once you do, especially when you link them to your purpose, you begin to see, this is the direction I should go in. And even though that decision may appear strange or may appear counter to what people think, you know, because it's very deep inside of you, that this is, in fact, the right direction. There's a story I often tell when I go to conferences on work-life balance. I'm uncomfortable telling that story here. It's a very personal story, but it is a very significant one in my life that has to do with my daughter who almost lost her life. But it was only because I had spent the time to see what my real values were, and the ethics that drew from that allowed me to get through that very difficult time. Marketing is always important for any organization that wants to stay around. I would say that the most effective is word of mouth. That takes a lot of work to build your business on word of mouth. It should not be ignored, though, just because it's hard and because it takes a long time. I certainly have used that. I certainly have used public speaking, whether it's at conferences or in meetings, workshops, where you can present yourself. And I would put the work that I'm doing right now in radio to fall into that category where you are presenting yourself, who you are, this living, breathing person. It's a way in which you can express yourself, and people can see that and read that. And that's another channel. I have never used any kind of magazine advertising or anything like that. It just didn't make sense to me. I haven't even used the yellow pages in the phone book, which of course now is almost meaningless. But I have used my website. And I would say I've probably redesigned my website over the years, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, about a half a dozen times. Because not only do you change yourself, but you learn better how you can say and express what you do, but also the style changes. And on the internet, the styles change very rapidly. So we went from, at one point we had a very complex website that was just terrific at the time that we designed it. I mean, people loved it. They would go in and they'd explore all kinds of places. But today, what do they want? They want Squarespace sites. Simple, clean. Go in, know exactly where you are, click here, and there's the information. They don't want to explore. They just want to get to it immediately. So we've used the website enormously for that. I think those are the principal channels for marketing that I have used. We have offered a rather wide range of services. Consulting companies tend to do that because what you want to do is make sure that you can capture as much business as you can. It's tough out there to compete. Over the years, I've been known for doing very careful research. So if an institution is really questioning a particular area and they don't understand it, then it's time to call on Madelyn, because we will design something that will go in, tease that apart, find out what the real issue is, and then from that, once you understand what the real problem is, then you can determine what the resolution is. So research is something that I've done a lot of. I've done gender research, I've done research on human resource policy, career paths, position descriptions, a whole range of things. That's only the beginning. We also have done a lot of teaching. Today I've shifted that so that I teach principally in the areas where leaders are most concerned. For 9 years I presented a 2-day retreat, for example. This is just an example. A 2-day retreat for women executives for the, I think it's called the Regional Chamber in Cincinnati. There we did 2 days of a story-based retreat for executive women on leadership development. As I said, 9 years of that, and they really enjoyed that. And that's an example of the kind of teaching I now do, because what I want to do is help leaders become more effective, and of course also people, but in general, but leaders. Right now I'm working on a workshop on resilience. I have a colleague at Harvard who she and I are working together. We're going to create a workshop on resilience, because resilience is something that anyone and everyone can improve in their life. Oftentimes we think we have to go to a therapist for these kinds of things. No, not resilience. Resilience is entirely in your control. So we're going to work on that to really help people become more resilient. So teaching is a part of it. The other things that we offer from the company, let's see. We also have helped individuals, coached individuals. I had one young woman, I really wish I could get in touch with her again, because I've kind of lost contact. She came to me because she wanted to get a promotion. And she said, Dr. Blair, I want you to coach me through my next performance evaluation, because this is the time I should be getting a promotion. And so I spent a very little bit of time, because I like to do things focused, problem focused. I don't like long engagements of, well, just come in and talk to me. No, let's get something done. I worked with her a very short period of time, gave her some homework. She came back to me, honed it. She went into her evaluation, and she got the promotion. So that kind of coaching, one-on-one coaching, really love to do that. We do a lot of writing, and I consider that one of our products, because we're dealing with an area that not everybody knows how to do it from a practical standpoint. If you go to psychologists and they talk to you about resilience, they will give you a lot of conceptual understanding. Their tests and their assessments and things like that tend to be rather general. I like to look at things from a practical behavioral standpoint. So when I teach about resilience, this is how you improve it. We can talk about the theory, but what I'd much rather do is have you move from A to B. So that's another area. I'm often asked, you know, how did I become who I am, and you know, all this, what appears to be success. And I guess it's success. I'm well known in fact, I'm known all over the world in the area of story and storytelling. But if I were to say what was the starting seed, I have to say it was my mother. She had enormous confidence in me and expectations. I mean, she expected me to do so much more than I would have dreamed possible. It took me years to figure out that that's what she was doing. That all the things that she said to me and helped me with was because she had such high expectations. And I think it was maybe in the last few weeks of her life that she and I, it was the only time she was ill, by the way, for about 3 weeks at the end. And she and I had a lot of long conversations. And it began to sink in that this woman understood what drove me. She understood what I was bringing to the table. She understood the potential that I had. I sometimes think that I am her. She started out life the same way, full of energy, full of drive, full of brilliance. And when she was 5, she was run over by a trolley car. Broke both her legs, her arms, ripped the face off of the side of her face. And she lived with that all her life. And so all that brilliance was bottled up in this person who was as sweet as you can imagine, but never able to achieve her potential because both of her physicality and because at the time women just simply didn't do that. And I sometimes think that maybe I gave her some joy because I was pushing forward without those impediments. My company, Pelleroy, exists in a tiny town called Jefferson, Maryland. And I mean it's tiny. It's only just now beginning to grow, unfortunately, as far as the natives are concerned. But my husband and I had to find a place to live, and we had literally 2 days to find a place to live. We knew that it had to be in the Washington, D.C. area because we both had just gotten jobs in the area. We knew it couldn't be too far from Washington, D.C. because we had to commute back and forth. And we also knew we had to have enough land so that our daughter could have a horse. Now, in Maryland, that's not easy to do, but we did it. We always tell the story. We came to the top of a mountain, and there was a telephone booth up there. And I say a mountain, you know, just a ridge. In Maryland, the mountains are just really just hills. And I went into that phone booth. I opened up the telephone book, and I looked up real estate. I put my finger on the page, called the number, and the man said, "Oh, sure, I'm just a mile down the road. Come on down. I'm sure we can find something for you." So we drove down this mile into a little town called Middletown, and we spent about 30 minutes with this man, and he said, "I know exactly what you want." And he took us to this particular property. At that time, it was just 10 acres of land. That's it. It had a stream, and it had some beautiful trees on it, but that was it. And it just felt right. And so we said, yes, we will buy this. And that's where we ended up living. We built our home there, and that's it. Now, the question though is, why did I put my business here? Now, I've said many times that when I started my business, I wanted it to be small so that I could be who I wanted to be, do things the way I wanted them. I didn't want to have to work for payroll. I wanted to work for me. And I said, I also don't want to pay rent. So I took the entire basement, redesigned it, turned it into my office so that I have an office, I have a place for other people to work, I have a conference room, I even have a kitchen down here, and everything is down here. And there is just no reason to move, especially now when you think about all the work you do virtually. So where you are in this kind of business doesn't make much difference. And you might as well enjoy beautiful scenery, which we have here. Many years ago, I was out working in the garden. I happen to like gardening. I love plants, I love flowers, trees. Always have, from the time I was very little. And I'm weeding. That's all I'm doing. I'm just weeding. And I looked at the plants and I went, you know, they are looking good. They're looking really good. And I kind of sat back and I said, you know, if I spent the rest of eternity gardening, I think I'd be happy. And the moment I said that, I went, Madelyn, you are a gardener in everything you do. Because what you love to do is help people be their best. If they're you know, a cosmo, you want them to have the biggest cosmo blossoms. If it's a tomato plant, you want to have the beautiful tomatoes on them. If this person is a writer, you want them to be the best writer they can be. If they're they love computing, you want them to be the best computer person they can be. Whatever it is, I like to garden people. Sometimes I feed them, sometimes I water them, sometimes I prune them. The key is, I want to help them be the best that they can be. Now, in my company, that philosophy has completely governed how we operate. And all of my staff have always understood that was an important aspect of Pellerai. So if you were to look at what makes us unique, it's that we are absolutely committed to helping people be their best, which means we bring our best to whatever problem a client or a customer has that they bring to us. I've done a lot of interviews. Oftentimes I'm on the other side of the camera, not on this side of the camera. And I think what I learned from this one is that when you engage in a conversation with even a stranger, the cameraman today is a perfect stranger to me, because I'm sharing so deeply from myself in response to the questions. You know, we're building a relationship. That's a lesson for us, a lesson for me, that it always works when you share something, a vulnerability. It really builds a connection with people. And I'll give you an example of that. The first time I fell on concrete, I gave myself a concussion and spent 4 days in bed. The second time I fell on concrete, I had learned how to fall better. You know, you turn your head, you don't land on your chin, you turn your head and you land on your hands and your arms. But this time, I knocked the wind out of me. couldn't get off the pavement for 15 minutes. I mean, I couldn't move. Talk about vulnerable. So you can imagine how uncomfortable I was one night when I was waiting for the train in the metro in Washington, D.C. And there were no trains. And it was rush hour and there were lots of people around. And I began to get nervous just because I wanted to get home, as was just about everybody else. And about that moment, the PA system came alive and the announcer said, "We're having problems with the tracks and there will be no red line trains this evening. Please leave the station." Well, I'm sure that that's what the announcer said. What I heard was, "Get out of here." And all I could think of was, I'm standing on terracotta tiles that are sitting on a concrete floor. And if anybody shoves me, I'm going to fall on this concrete. And I really began to get nervous, very nervous. I said, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? I can't control this crowd. What would my mother do? She would sing. I'm not going to sing in front of this crowd. I'll hum. So I began to hum. And you know, when your brain gets distracted and you have to think about your breath and you have to think about the note and you have to think about the timing, and pretty soon I was relaxed and I hummed my way out of the station. Didn't fall. And I thought, well, that was pretty cool. And then sometime later I discovered something that a man by the name of Viktor Frankl said. Now, Viktor Frankl is a famous psychologist, and he said something like this. I'm going to paraphrase, I'm sure. He said, between stimulus and response, there is a space. And in that space is the power of choice. And in your choice lies your freedom and your growth. And I went, wow. That's exactly what happened in that metro. There I was. There was the stimulus. I was afraid of falling. My response instead was to think of another strategy. And I did it. This interview has helped me to see that the stimulus is that I have to meet with a stranger and answer his questions. And my response is, let it all hang out, because this is who you are. And now I'm at the end, and I have enjoyed it enormously. And that's what I've learned.